Hello and welcome to the Empowered for Change channel. I am Deborah Gilbert White, also known as Dr. D, your host. Here we celebrate and encourage people who are and who seek to make a difference in the world. We do this through our Conversation with series, which you have joined in today. We also provide weekly quotes available every Monday morning, lifting voices of women of color that inspire, encourage, and affirm what we bring individually and collectively to our communities and the world. Today, we welcome Dr. Ann Aviles. Dr. Ann, educator, author, social change advocate. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm going to read a short bio. You have so much going on. I said, oh, I know she's doing more than this, but because I know what you do. But I'll read a short bio so that we can people can know who we're talking with today.
Okay.
Ann M. Aviles is an associate professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Sciences at the University of Delaware. Her research areas include examining policies and practices that positively impact the educational opportunities, material realities, and mental health of individuals and families experiencing homelessness or housing instability. Dr. Aviles is the author of several publications, including her recent co authored book, Serving Students Who Are Homeless, a resource guide for schools, districts, educational leaders, and community partners. And again, I say welcome to you, Dr. Ann.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad you're here. So glad you said yes. When I do these conversations, I try to remember when I first met the individual that I'm in conversation with. And I have to tell you, I was pleasantly surprised as I went back and to see, how we connected. And I remember at one point I was in Wilmington looking to get more connected in community with grassroots advocacy. And I went to a meeting. I think it was Network Delaware. I'm not quite sure, but I think it was. And a young lady there who was a student said that you and I needed to connect, that you had been to a previous meeting or something, and she wanted us to connect. And so I looked back at the emails, and that was nearly 10 years ago.
Oh my
It was like
God.
2016, 2017. I said, oh my Lord, this feels like we met yesterday, but it's been nearly 10 years that we've been in community together. And so I
Oh,
just wanted to bring that up. Um, I also thought, that with you being an educator as well and a person who is into advocacy, that it seems like we didn't meet in academia, we met in community, and we continue to work in community. um, can we talk today about your advocacy, starting with well, I guess I'll go back to when I met you. I also discovered that you had written another book, the first book, and that book was titled From Charity to Equity: Race, Homelessness, and Urban Schools. And I found it to be enlightening. I found it to be informative, a journey into the educational concerns of children who were identified or students who were identified as homeless or at risk of homelessness. Today, I would like for you to share about your ongoing advocacy work and your newest publication, which we talked about a little bit earlier, Serving Homeless Students. Can we start with what propelled you to write the first book and how you became an advocate for students without housing?
sure. Thank you. And I can't believe it's, yeah, 2016, 2017. Wow. I do remember you coming to my class and speaking to the students, and, it's just great. Um, Okay, so from charity to equity, race, homelessness, and urban schools was actually my dissertation. So I started. I'm gonna go back a little bit. So I'm trained as a clinician. So I started off in the field of occupational therapy, which is in the health sciences, and I had the honor of being a student who participated in what then was a pilot occupational therapy internship It was not the traditional. Most occupational therapists are in hospital settings. Some are in community settings now more so. I'm going to age myself a little bit here. This was, I graduated with my undergrad degree in 98, right? So this was some time ago. So 1997, I was finished my first year of the occupational therapy program, and we had to choose our first site of where we would go and do our internship. And so the one of the faculty members was working at with a local domestic violence shelter for women
Mhm.
and children who were experiencing homelessness because of domestic violence. And I applied to that one. It really was interesting to me. I wanted to learn more about, well, what would I do as an occupational therapist in a setting
Mhm.
like this? So our job was to work with the 6 to 12-year-olds and to assess their development to see were they on a good developmental trajectory, right? That 6 to 12 age, and to really focus on their mental health and well-being. Many of the young people had either experienced direct violence, right, because of the domestic violence between their parents, and or their parent
Mhm.
and partner, because not always, right, was it the biological parent, and to also help them process the anger, the sadness,
Mhm.
right, of these experiences. And now they're taken out of, right, their community and they're put in a shelter.
Mhm.
So our job was to really work with those young people, and then eventually we ended up working with the moms as well. So that's what really started my understanding around homelessness and how prevalent it really was
Mhm.
and is. I also spent time working, as I said, with the mothers. The person I worked with at the time, she had a grant to look at the relationship between domestic violence and disability. And
Mhm.
so we interviewed the women. And so I remember several conversations with the women who talked about having, in particular, teenage sons who were not allowed to come to the shelter with them because of the concerns around safety for other women, and the trauma, right, that comes with young boys who, even though developmentally they are young, they may look bigger. And that could be, it could be triggering for some of the women. And so
Mhm.
I said, "Well, where is your son, or where is your, where are they?" And a lot of times they talked about youth shelters, and I was like, "Well, what do you mean? What do you
Mhm.
mean? There's kids out here living on their own without a parent or a guardian?"
Mhm.
So that was really interesting to me, and I wanted to understand. At that point, I was still in my early 20s, and I thought, in high school, if I didn't have a parent who was on me, if I didn't have stable housing, I don't know that I would have gone and completed school.
Mhm.
And so I ended up starting to do volunteer work at a youth shelter. This was all in Chicago. I was still in Chicago at the time. And I started doing life skills groups with a social worker. It was a shelter for young people 14 to 21 who were not in the care of a parent or guardian. And
Mhm.
it was through that work, one, that I realized how amazing these young people were,
Yeah.
the resilience that they had, but also how unfair these structures were, right? The
Mhm.
fact that they had to deal with these things. So that's what so I ended up doing my master's thesis. Was I interviewed 30 young people who were residing at the shelter, and I really wanted to understand from their perspective that lived what now a lot of people talk about lived experience and how important
Yes.
that is. I didn't have the language at that time, but I just knew their voices needed to be amplified. Um,
Mhm.
so through that work, they talked about school as a tool for social mobility to help them not become then adults that were experiencing homelessness. But of the 30, three were enrolled in school. And I said, well, hold on. If this is your plan. How are we going
Mm,
to get there? And it was actually a case manager at that shelter who said, well, have you ever heard of the McKinney-Vento Act? I've never heard of McKinney-Vento. So I went home that day and I
mhm,
found out more about McKinney-Vento. I was still finishing up my master's program, and I started to take a few other classes in education. And then, even though I swore I was done with school, about a year after my master's program, I ended up enrolling in a PhD program specifically for education policy so that I could do more work in the schools to understand how McKinney-Vento was working or not working for young people.
right.
So that just, I think it was through those interactions and those conversations with the young people that really made me realize how brilliant they were, how much
Mhm,
knowledge they had about what was working or not working, right? Many times policy and programs are created by people who haven't had the experience. And
right.
so while they're well intended, they're often, and this is not everyone,
Mhm,
they can be misinformed, right? There's a lot of, and that's why I named my book From Charity to Equity, because especially when we think about homeless, it's
mhm,
often this, oh, we feel bad for them, or oh, we have to, raise money to do like a book bag drive. And while
mhm.
I those things are nice and they're necessary, right, to support, um, why don't we have better systems and structures so that less people have to then end up in these precarious situations?
And I agree so much with you with that. Yes, yes.
Yeah, so that's really what kind of spurred me. And then the other piece I'll say, coupled with being from Chicago, I'm born and raised in Chicago,
Mhm,
and Chicago is very much an activist space, right? When we
yes.
think about um, the Saul Alinsky way of organizing, right? There's um, at that time there was just, I remember there were already marches happening around undocumented folks in Chicago. There was
Mhm,
already protest around the closing of schools, right? Chicago closed the most schools ever in one academic year, 50 schools, which
right.
just,
Ooh.
wreaked havoc for so many poor Black and Brown families. So
Mhm,
it was being in community um, the with folks who did that work. The
mhm,
other thing I'll say is the faculty in the ed policy. I went to UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago. They
mhm,
also really helped guide us in ways that I think are not as common now. They really wanted us to use knowledge as a tool for
mhm.
resistance, right? As a tool for
It's
change.
too. Yeah.
And so we had professors who were also a part of these protests. We had professors who
Mhm,
encouraged us to go to, for example, there was when the school closings were happening, there was a lot of people, they did a hunger strike and they were like, go talk to them, go
mhm,
support them, show up
mhm,
for them. Even if you can't donate money, you can just show up and have a conversation with someone as an act of solidarity.
mhm.
And so I had professors who really exemplified for me how you could use your power, right? Your academic knowledge in ways that served community. And
Yeah.
so that is really kind of the spirit I was acclimated into the academy with, which I think
Mhm.
most people are not. And so that is I did not realize how unique that was
Mhm.
until I've met other people who were like, "What?" Like, no, they were canceling classes and saying, "No, we're going to the protests. Like, class is the
Mhm.
protest today,"
Right.
and that's just not as common.
And that is so important that you lift that because that was a similar experience I had it at Cleveland State University where I did my undergrad and my master's, and I had a professor who was a former Black Panther. And so
Ooh.
I need not say more. I need not say more. I mean, social justice and encouraging us, to look at things differently, and especially the systems that we, living through in and working through. And so I think, being an academia as you are in such a key position, to support young people who are thinking in different ways about the ways that we have been normalized to think about how life can be. And so, yeah, and a professor did that for me, and I see several did that for you as well. So, yeah, yeah, teachers, professors, educators are important. Are
Well,
important.
and I really want to lift up, you just made me think of the difference between education and schooling.
Mm-hmm.
Education is a form of liberation, as you said, understanding and really seeing the structures and not just accepting the status quo, right?
Right.
And I think schools often, and not all, but schools often um, kind of acclimate people to follow the rules, follow the test, and you'll be
Mm-hmm.
successful.
Right.
And so I think schooling in a traditional sense is more about compliance and order and following rules, whereas
Mm-hmm.
education is like inquiry. Let's question, let's
Mm-hmm.
understand why things are this way, not just say it's this way, so this is what we do.
Right, right, and that is key. That is so key. I was also thinking as you was talking, about the new book that you have, where you co-authored, serving students who are homeless. How does this book? How did it come to be, and how does it expand on what you shared in your first book?
Oh, absolutely. Great question. So, well, one, I'm going to shout out Ron Hallett and Linda Skurla, who authored the first edition of that book,
Okay.
Serving Students Who Are Homeless. And our goal in the second edition, Ron invited me on to really focus on the community piece. So, really understanding that schools cannot do it alone, right?
Right.
That the teachers are doing their best to support students, and their primary job is to educate the young people. And so, how can schools work with community to help fill those other basic needs that we know young people and their families require if they're going to be successful students? And so that is really the goal of the book, is to have it be as practitioner focused as possible. We do embed the research in it, but
Mm-hmm.
if you notice, it's a thin book. The chapters are pretty short. We have a lot of appendices in there. We have activities. And so it's really meant to be a tool to help support the implementation of McKinney-Vento in schools. I
Mm-hmm.
think my first book was really focused on more awareness and really saying, like, hey, look at these young people who are navigating school independently. And
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted people, in particular teachers, to understand everything students were going through, and how the policy was meant, right, to alleviate some of these challenges. I think the second book is building on that to say, like, okay, here we are many years later.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we continue to bolster McKinney Vento in ways that really support students and their families? Because most students, even though my first work focused more on the unaccompanied,
Yeah.
most kids are embedded in homes, right, or in families. And
Mm-hmm.
if the families are struggling, it's very hard for this young person to ignore that struggle just simply because they've walked into the school. And so,
Mm-hmm.
really, this book is meant to still highlight like the awareness around McKinney-Vento, but is
Mm-hmm.
really meant to be more of a practical tool to help teachers, administrators, state coordinators, right, which is what's
Mm-hmm.
required by McKinney-Vento, the liaisons that are in schools and districts, to better implement McKinney-Vento, especially in light of the fact that McKinney-Vento is always underfunded,
Yeah.
right? So there's not enough funding to really implement it the way it's written. And so,
Mm-hmm.
how can we collaborate with community partners to help fill some of those gaps?
Yeah, and that is so key. I want to also give you opportunity to expand a little bit on what McKinney Vento is, because before I started doing homeless advocacy, I didn't know anything about it. And
Mhm.
then I found out more about it during the COVID 19 crisis and working and being in community with people who are working with children and students, keeping them educated while not being in a school building. Just share a little bit about what McKinney-Vento means for students.
Sure, absolutely. So McKinney-Vento is it's actually part of a larger policy
Mm-hmm.
addressing homelessness. McKinney-Vento, oh, it's been a while since it's like part 2B or something. I'm probably getting the number wrong in the policy, but basically, that's the part that focuses specifically on school age children. And so McKinney-Vento says, one, it's a more expansive definition than housing and urban development, right? What HUD uses to define homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
McKinney-Vento defines homelessness as any person who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So it
Mm-hmm.
includes people that are doubled up. It includes people that might be sleeping in cars or abandoned buildings. Oftentimes, when we think homeless, it's people on the street. We don't often, or in a shelter, we don't think about these other precarious
Right.
housing situations. So one, I really love that it cast a wider net and provides a more accurate description of that housing precarity and what that means then for learning. McKinney-Vento says you cannot deny students access to education simply because they do not have an address. So many times when parents go to enroll their child in school, proof of address, immunizations, right? Previous school records. And many times, because people had lost their housing, they had also lost these very critical documents. So,
Yes.
what that meant was that children, in addition to now to not being stably housed, now they were missing out on that education. And
Mm-hmm.
schools also, right, can be anchors of stability for children. They have their friends, they know the teachers. So removing both home and school, the advocates of that time said, no, 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 no. We can't do that. We need some consistency for these young people. And so,
Yes.
what we are telling you is you need to enroll these children immediately. Don't We'll worry about that paperwork later.
Mm-hmm.
Let's keep them, right, give them some consistency. So McKinney-Vento, that is its primary goal, is to remove barriers so that children and their parents can access schools, and to make sure it's similar to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, in that it says that unhoused children should have the same access as their housed peers. We should not
Yeah.
discriminate against them simply because they're not stably housed. So it
Mm-hmm.
provides transportation to make sure they can get to and from school, meals, right? Free meals. It waives any fees because, again, recognizing if the parent
Right.
cannot maintain housing, how can they pay these additional, right, costs? So McKinney-Vento is really its primary aim is to remove barriers and then to provide supports so that the unhoused children or the precariously housed children have the same access as their housed peers.
Yeah. It's important legislation. I believe is the first legislation connected to homelessness in the country,
Yes.
and I was glad to hear that when I did learn about it. And it continues on to protect our students.
Yes, I think I'm so glad you said that because I remember when I was first reading it, it was the very first comprehensive
Mm-hmm.
approach to addressing homelessness. So it addresses homeless veterans, it addresses the housing piece. Um, it was implemented in 1987. And so this is where I'm like, ooh, and it's 2020 what? And people
Six.
still don't know about it.
Right.
So
Right.
that has been a big piece of my advocacy is just the awareness. Like, do you all know that this thing exists? When I was
Mm-hmm.
taking courses in my ed policy program, I had classes with principals and assistant principals, and they tell you, everybody share what your research is and what you want to talk about. And so I would talk about McKinney-Vento, and I would have
Mm-hmm.
people saying, I've never heard of that. And I've been in education for 15 years. And I'm going,
Mm-hmm.
what? How have you never heard of this?
Right. Right.
So to me, that's a structural problem, right? And this was one of the recommendations I made from the first book is schools of education, any program that is preparing pre-service teachers, counselors, anybody who's going to set foot in a school building, they should all have McKinney-Vento as part of their curriculum. They should all leave
Yes.
their education program knowing what it is, and we're not there yet.
Yeah. And it's you brought up a key challenge to addressing and serving the needs of students, that people know what legislation and what protections are out there and what support is out there already as they enter into the arena. What are some of the other challenges that you have seen doing this work? And then what are some of the promising practices?
Oh, absolutely. So I would say challenges, a lot of the challenge is stigma. There's a lot of assumption that people who are experiencing homelessness are, it's because of addiction, it's because of mental health, right? And while those things do exist, I would say for many families and children, it is simply that they are not paid enough to, right, maintain their housing. So, we know minimum wage is still not what it needs to be for
Mm-hmm.
people to be able to afford rent. And so I think if people could really understand that most of the families and students who are experiencing homelessness are just like you and me,
Yes.
right? The biggest difference is they don't have stable housing.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, there's not a lot of difference. So I think that's a big piece, is to push people on housing instability. And that's why sometimes I even try not to use the word homeless, but it's what people know, right?
Right.
Language does matter. But I try to say like housing unstable or
Mm-hmm.
precariously housed to really
Mm-hmm.
help people see, right, these differences. So I would say that's a big challenge in terms of just like a social
Mm-hmm.
aspect. Then the other piece, which is out of most of our control, unfortunately, is the funding,
Right.
right? Unfortunately, as homelessness has risen, so too have the students, right? So McKinney-Vento has gotten better um, at identifying. I should say the policy has pushed schools to better identify students, which is great. There's
Yes.
not always a lot of funding to really help them meet their needs. So as I said earlier, the McKinney-Vento is almost always underfunded. And
Mm-hmm.
so a big piece is trying to find that funding. Um, in terms of promising practices, what I will say is definitely since I've been looking at McKinney-Vento, more people know about it, so that makes
Mm-hmm.
me really happy. There's more organizations like Schoolhouse Connection who regularly put out reports and really try to support, right, the schools and the districts.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the work that my colleagues and I have done around really trying to connect community and schools, right? Knowing schools can't do it all by themselves. And so, how do we help bridge some of those gaps through collaboration and through community?
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, that's really promising that people want to do more, and
Yes.
they just need some tools or maybe some reminders about like, hey, let's try this or let's do that. I think most people want to help, they just don't always know how.
Right, right. And I like the title of the book when you go and you talk about the touch points of parents and community and education, the educators. Um, it always boils back down to the funding, the lack of funding.
Yeah.
No matter how we're looking at this, the issue of homelessness, whether it's a lack of funding for to support people in staying in housing or developing low income affordable housing, it's always goes back to the funding. And with the work that you're doing now, have you seen how parents are beginning to become more involved in the legislative process of supporting that funding coming into their communities?
I would say I have not. I know of places where, yes, there are more parents doing that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that it's really challenging because many of the parents are working, right?
Yes.
Again, um, I'll say, I don't, bias isn't the right word, but this misunderstanding that the parents that are experiencing homelessness, that they're just sitting at, at the shelter or at the
Hmm.
library. No, they're working.
They're working. Yeah.
But most of the times they're working. And so
Hmm.
it's very challenging because them taking off work to do these things then means it puts them further behind financially. And so, I don't know that I've
Hmm.
thought about this, like how do we get more parents involved?
Hmm.
And unfortunately that also has some funding to it, right? Because I would love to, and we have done some work where we have like funding to pay people to go out and like canvas and create awareness, or
Hmm.
we can organize them to all, let's go down to the school board together and have this conversation. But
Hmm.
that's definitely much more challenging.
Right.
But again, I do think that the parents are more than capable. I think the real issue is their capacity, because they're spending their time trying to make sure they go to work, pay those bills, and still be a parent.
Right.
And because right now our minimum wage does not keep up, right, with the actual cost of living, most
Hmm.
people have to work two or three jobs, or like a main job and then a bunch of side hustles, which then
Hmm.
stretches them so thin.
Right.
And so that's why I think for us, we really wanted to think about how can we equip, like you said, all the different kind of
Yeah.
folks involved, so that all the burden doesn't fall on the parents, or all of
Right.
it doesn't fall on the teachers. How can we all kind of take a little piece to
Hmm.
then rise together?
Right. And I love how you explained that, because it's so true. When I was in the shelter myself, I saw, the parents who were there, who were leaving, once they got the kids off to school, to go to a job, to go to a job. And most people don't think that people in a shelter are working, and sometimes multiple jobs, so
Yeah.
it goes back to those stereotypes and myths of what it means, for people who are experiencing homelessness, or who are identified as unhoused, and what they are doing, to survive, in those situations. And now we add the added consideration of having children, and providing for them, and their education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I want to add to that is also a lot of the work I've been doing since coming to Delaware is really equipping people with that lived experience, with newer skills, right, in navigating these systems. So there's a methodology called participatory action research. And so
Mhm.
it's really great because it recognizes that the people who have the experiences, right, of the challenge or issue, so for us, right, homelessness, they have insight that a book will never give us,
Yeah.
right? And so how do we, one, see that, as a strength, and to combat these stereotypes, and then how do we build from there to say, hey, you have knowledge that is really important and critical, I have some knowledge that can help, this recipe, let's work together. So how do we equip, I think, even the students with these knowledge and tools
Mhm.
to then be advocates, right? To say, hey, I am concerned about ABCD, especially I would say middle school, high school, right? Where
Mhm.
they can better understand and articulate these things. So I think always including people who have the experience is so
Mhm.
critical, because otherwise, um, all of us, right, have been exposed in similar ways to these myths and these stereotypes. And I think it
Mhm.
is by being in community with people impacted that we then better understand, like, no, that's not accurate. Like, no, that's
No.
mm-mm. I'm not going to take that, right?
Right,
And
right.
going back to our earlier conversation, right? That's the critical piece. And then we start to ask different questions, right?
Hmm.
We start to notice, well, who is missing from this conversation when this decision is being made?
Right.
And so I think our role as researchers, as educators, as advocates, if we don't have that lived experience, or if we are, we become removed from that experience, how do
Hmm.
we stay right in that space where we're always bringing folks in so that we don't fall too far into, right, that
Hmm.
way of thinking or acting? Because
Hmm.
there's people, who they get to a certain place and all of a sudden it's, oh, those people are lazy. Those people, and you're like, those kid.
Well,
Um, so
dangerous language.
yes, exactly. It's really,
Yeah,
it's like, no, all of us. And I
all
think,
of us. Yeah,
especially with housing, I really think people underestimate how close most of us are to losing our housing.
yeah.
It can happen to anybody at
It could
any
happen
time.
to anybody, anytime. And it's so true, so true.
Yeah.
So what is, I'm here. I think you shared some of it already, but what is the hope that you still hold on to, as we move through this? Because this has been a protracted struggle on every front, looking at this whole issue of housing and homelessness. What is your hope as you look at it as it relates to the students that you're serving?
Yeah, I think the hope is the people, right? Like
Mhm.
seeing the young people speak up, stand up. You made me think of, and you might have actually been at this event. I can't remember. So here in Delaware, we did an event around homelessness and housing, and I remember one of the speakers was a young lady who herself, her family was experiencing homelessness, and she was
Mhm.
like Miss Delaware, Miss Junior Delaware, or something like
Mhm.
that. And I was like, yes, yes. Here, like, did you hear what she said, people? So
Mhm.
seeing the young people, and I would say even in my courses, right, talking to young people who want to see a better world, right, who
Mhm.
are really working to create the world we all want. And I
Yes.
think going back right earlier to when I talked to my mentors who've been doing this work a long time, they, I think, also help ground me to say, like, this is nothing new. We've
Mhm.
been through, it might look a little different, right? It might feel different.
Yeah.
The stakes might be different, but a lot of this is, right, similar dynamics. And so we've done it before, we've gotten
Mhm.
through it, we can continue to do that, right? And so I think it is, being in community with people, and not just in the quote unquote work,
Right.
but I mean, our team, this, we're a part of that homes core
Yeah.
team. The
Mhm.
Let me say it correctly. So housing opportunity, mobility, equity, stability, homes campaign Delaware. We also like to have fun. You know what I mean? Like we joke around and we just check
Mhm.
in on each other. We hung out and like made food together, so we try to also build some respite for us and some
Mhm.
community for us when we're feeling a little beat up from everything happening in the world.
Okay.
So I don't know. For me, the hope is the people that continue to show up, right?
Yes.
Even when I'm tired and someone's like, "Yep, we're gonna do this today." I'm like, "We're gonna do this today," right?
Yeah.
Or vice versa, right? Somebody else is tired and I'm feeling good that day, and so I think it's not something you can do alone. And I
Right.
that's again the American kind of fallacy of individualism
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
democracy, right? It's like, hold on, like
No.
systems and structures, you can work really, really hard, and the
Mhm.
system can still block your opportunity.
Amen.
And so we can't just say it's me alone. We have to be in community with one another. And that
Yeah.
is, I think, what will save us.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. I think about when you talked about the Homes campaign, and I'm energized by Cheyenne Miller and Brandon Fletcher. I mean, I'm just energized because they're young people who say, okay, like, this is nothing new. We've seen this before,
Hmm.
but these young people are really coming at it in a new and bold way, or in a bolder way that will get us to the next level. And
Yes.
so, yeah, so that's encouraging too. Well, as we end our time together, I want to ask you: is there a question that I have not asked that you would like to answer?
I don't think so. That's a really good question. Mm. Well, what I would like to ask you, if that's okay, is what
Mhm.
brings you joy and what keeps you going in all of this?
I have a tagline that says "Finding joy on the journey." I like traveling, and so that's what brings me joy and keeps me um, stable in doing this work, and seeing what's happening around issues connected to housing and homelessness nationally, but also in Delaware. And also having victories like we did. What was it, Tuesday night, or Monday? Well, yeah, well, today's Friday.
Yes,
So yeah, when we won an ordinance in
Dover.
Dover, Delaware, knowing that people who are advocates were out there, you know, fighting and working on behalf of people who may not be able to speak for themselves. And so when I see how hard we work, and I know that we have to step back to really begin to replenish ourselves, I find that in traveling. And so I find little ways to get away and to replenish myself and look at nature. And that's what keeps me going. And then having conversations with people like you and others who are looking to change, to make the world a better place. That's keeps me going. Now, Anne, I thought did I ask you to read an excerpt from your book?
You
Did
did not.
I? Okay, so I'm not gonna put you on the spot with that.
I was
But
like,
what
oh, I
we
need to grab it. I can, but I would need to go grab it.
No, 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 no. We're not going to worry about that. What we will do, we want to thank people for joining us today, and we want to thank you for spending time with us today as well. And we will share your contact information and also information for how people will be able to obtain the new book. And so, just want to thank you for all that you are doing in community. Thank you for saying yes to joining us today, and we will ask people, please, if you want to continue to see these type of conversations with people in community working on issues that matter to you, like our channel, subscribe, share, and comment. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.